The Senate hearing chamber was packed wall to wall, not just with staffers and reporters, but with anticipation. The kind that crackled beneath the hum of overhead lights and settled into every tightly folded arm and sharpened gaze. The subject of the hearing was framed as a standard inquiry into corporate accountability, infrastructure expansion, and ethical AI. But everyone knew what it really was: a political theater built for one moment. And the moment had a name: Elon Musk. He sat alone at the center witness table, surrounded by polished mahogany and half a dozen senators whose aides had worked overtime prepping sound bites and sharp-edged questions meant to wound, embarrass, or tame him. But Musk didn't look tamed. He looked bored. One leg crossed over the other, a pen twirling absently between two fingers, his expression unreadable except for the faintest hint of anticipation in the corner of his mouth. The senator across from him was Gerald Varnham, a career politician known for his stern rhetoric, his commanding voice, and his disdain for what he frequently called tech billionaires who play God with the world's future. Varnham was smart, practiced, and hungry for a viral moment. Today he had one goal: bring Musk to heel. "Mr. Musk," Varnham began, his voice echoing just slightly too loud into the microphone. "Let's get something straight. You own the majority stake in the world's largest electric vehicle company, a private space agency that functions like a national institution, a satellite communication system that spans the globe, and now, through your acquisition of X, you control a significant portion of public discourse." He paused for dramatic effect. "Would you agree that's a dangerous amount of power for one man to wield?" A few camera shutters clicked. Musk didn't blink. "I'd agree it's a lot of responsibility," he said simply. "Not sure. About dangerous. Depends on your definition of danger." Varnham's eyebrows lifted like a man who'd just been handed his cue. "Well, I define it as the ability to influence markets, elections, and minds, with no checks and balances. You don't answer to a board, to voters, to regulators. I answer to results," Musk interrupted, calmly, coolly. "To customers, to engineers, to physics, and occasionally to people like you, who seem more concerned with optics than outcomes." The room rippled, not with sound, but with tension. Varnham leaned forward. "Don't mistake this hearing for optics. Mr. Musk, this is about accountability. You speak freely about colonizing Mars and building AI that could outthink every human alive, and yet you act like these things are toys, projects for your personal amusement rather than risks that affect billions." Musk smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't warmth but restraint. "I don't build toys," he said. "I build what your committees forgot to imagine." That landed. Hard. Varnham sat back, eyes narrowing. "Is that what you call bypassing FAA guidelines for Starship launches, or overriding local laws with autonomous vehicle fleets that still crash into parked cars?" Elon leaned forward now, not out of aggression, but with precision. Every word sharp, every syllable loaded. "You think progress happens without friction?" he asked. "Do you think the Wright brothers waited for airspace regulations before they left the ground? Do you think Edison filed for environmental permits before building a grid? The only reason you're sitting here with a microphone and not a candle is because someone broke something before you had the chance to regulate it." The room had gone very, very still. Varnham tried to pivot. "That may sound noble, but let's talk specifics. You control Starlink, a satellite network that military groups have relied on in wartime. You turned it off during a conflict in Ukraine, didn't you? Because you personally disagreed with its use?" Musk's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of heat, but his voice remained controlled. "I prevented an escalation that could have triggered global war. I'm not the Pentagon. But when governments fail to act responsibly, sometimes someone has to." "Ah," Varnham said, eyes gleaming. "So you admit that you unilaterally made a decision that changed the course of a military operation. Isn't that exactly the danger I'm talking about?" Musk leaned back. "No, Senator. That's the point. You're angry not because I made a decision. You're angry because I didn't wait for yours." Boom. Even the stenographer paused. The hearing hadn't collapsed into chaos. It had crystallized into a moment. Because for all the talking points Varnham had stacked on cue cards and advisors had crammed into briefings, none of it could match the brutal simplicity of what Musk had just said. He wasn't bragging. He was stating a fact. And the silence that followed wasn't just from the senator. It was from the room, from the viewers, from the system. The stillness inside the chamber had texture now. It wasn't a pause between arguments. It was the stunned quiet that follows an unexpected blow. Elon Musk's words didn't explode. They sliced. And everyone in the room could feel the cut. Senator Varnham stared at him for a moment too long, lips slightly parted, caught between the instinct to fire back and the sudden realization that his narrative had just been hijacked. He glanced down at his notes, pages of prepared questions and forceful rebuttals. But the words seemed thinner now, flimsier, like cardboard shields in the face of steel. Before he could recover, Musk spoke again. His voice was measured, but firmer now, no longer deflecting, defining. Senator, with all due respect, you act as if progress is supposed to ask permission. It doesn't. It happens. Sometimes at 3 a.m, sometimes in a lab, sometimes in a hangar in Texas, while your committee is asleep. Varnham's jaw clenched. Musk continued unflinching. You call it dangerous. I call it necessary. You say it's unchecked. But what you mean is that it's not under your control. And that's a very different problem. A murmur swept through the gallery. Not loud, but persistent, like people clearing their throats, just to have something to do. The committee chair tapped the gavel once, gently, a signal that the moment was not over, only changing form. Senator Riggs, seated 2 chairs to the left of Varnham, leaned into her mic. She was older, quieter, known for her pointed logic. Mr. Musk, no one here disputes your contributions to technology. But we live in a democracy. Innovation cannot be exempt from accountability. Musk turned toward her, expression softening slightly. I agree, he said. But accountability to what? Bureaucracy that moves slower than the problems it claims. To fix? Regulations written decades ago for industries that no longer exist? He tapped the table lightly with one finger. I'm not asking to be above the law. I'm asking you to catch up. That landed differently. Less like a jab and more like a challenge. Senator Riggs didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Varnham, however, wasn't finished. So let me get this straight, he said, his tone tightening. You think because you move fast, because you have money and engineers and ambition, that you're entitled to operate without oversight? That we're supposed to trust you with AI, with autonomous weapons, with the future of planetary civilization? Musk didn't blink. No, he said. You're not supposed to trust me. He let it hang. You're supposed to build something better. But until you do, I will. Gasps this time. Quiet, sharp intakes of breath. Like the moment someone realizes they're no longer watching a hearing. They're watching a shift, something real, something dangerous to the old rhythm of power. Varnham leaned forward, almost growling into the mic. That's not how this country works. Musk tilted his head. Maybe that's the problem. The words hit like thunder. One of the younger senators sat back in his chair, blinking hard, visibly thrown. An aide standing along the back wall of the room looked at her tablet, eyes wide, watching hashtags bloom in real time. Musk, v. Senate, either catch up or get out. Permission not required. The committee chair cleared his throat, a little louder now. Let's return to the line of questioning, but there was no returning. Not really, because Musk had done what he always did, not through yelling or provocation, but by changing the terms of the conversation. The hearing had started as an interrogation. Now, it was a referendum. He wasn't on trial anymore. The system was, and no one was quite sure how to pull it back. Senator Varnham sat still, but it was a brittle stillness, the kind that comes from holding something broken together with pride alone. His fingers tightened around his pen, knuckles white. His body leaned forward, but his argument had already fallen back. He hadn't just lost ground, He'd lost control of the room. Elon Musk didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had done something far more devastating than insult or provoke. He had made the hearing irrelevant. And now, as the committee scrambled to reestablish structure, Musk simply waited, calm as a man who'd seen storms come and go and knew they always passed. Senator Riggs spoke next, her tone steady but sharpened now with cautious curiosity. Mr. Musk, you've made it clear that you believe current regulatory frameworks are outdated. But don't you think it's dangerous to act unilaterally while the rest of the country and the world is still deciding what responsible innovation looks like? Musk nodded slowly. I think what's dangerous is inaction. You're worried about a future shaped without consensus. I'm worried about a future that never arrives because we waited for permission to build it. The room listened. Even the staffers had stopped typing, phones remained in laps. Everyone was watching, not like spectators at a political match, but like people hearing something that didn't sound like rhetoric. It sounded like reality, spoken out loud. Pamphlets rustled in the background. A few reporters whispered urgently into microphones, broadcasting every syllable to viewers now multiplying by the second. I'm not anti-government, Musk continued. But if we wait for every system to catch up, we'll be debating rocket permits while China's building colonies on the moon. We'll be stuck regulating the last disaster while the next one is already brewing. Bold predictions, Varnham muttered. It was the first thing he'd said in minutes, and it sounded smaller now, less like authority, more like background noise. Musk didn't even turn to him. He addressed the entire room. Let me remind you, he said, that when SpaceX first proposed reusable rockets, the general consensus was that it was impossible, impractical, or unnecessary. Now we're landing boosters in the ocean and saving hundreds of millions per launch. That wasn't because we followed a playbook. It's because we burned the playbook and built the math. A young staffer near the back of the room scribbled something down, wide-eyed. Musk leaned forward. I hear a lot of fear in this room. Fear of mistakes, fear of speed, fear of new power structures. But innovation doesn't wait for fear to be resolved. It just moves. And the people who shape it are the ones willing to take the heat for getting it wrong, not the ones who waited until it was safe. That landed like steel on marble. Senator Jennings, younger, less combative than the others, cleared his throat. So you're saying regulation is always wrong? Musk shook his head. No, I'm saying regulation should be adaptive. Reactive regulation is what we've got now. Laws built around yesterday's tech. What we need is proactive ethics. A framework that evolves with capability, not one that punishes velocity. And you think you should be the one to decide what's ethical? Musk finally allowed a small smile. I think I'm one of the few who actually loses sleep over the implications of what I build. I don't just think about what our tech can do. I think about what happens if we don't build it and someone worse does. Silence. Again. But this silence was different, heavier. No one missed the implication that sometimes the danger isn't in too much progress, but in who gets there first. Senator, Musk added quietly, you're trying to make me small enough to regulate. I'm trying to make the future big enough that we all survive it. The words hit like thunder, quiet but bone deep. Not because they were loud, but because they were true. The kind of true that makes people sit up straighter. The kind that slips past ideology and lands directly in the gut. Aid phones buzzed with updates. Live viewership was spiking. Trending tags had shifted. The entire hearing had moved from political pageant to something elemental, a reckoning between pace and permission. And Elon Musk, sitting alone with nothing but his voice and his clarity, had seized it. Not through aggression, not through charm, through conviction. And the senators, elected to lead, now struggling to follow, could only try to keep up. The room, once a theater of control, now pulsed with something far more volatile, discomfort wrapped in awe. No senator spoke immediately, not because they had run out of questions, but because Elon Musk had shifted the center of gravity. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a collision. Senator Varnham sat with his jaw clenched, as if physically restraining himself from erupting, but his silence said more than words could. He had come for a takedown and walked into a transformation. Elon hadn't dodged accountability, he had redefined it. And now the hearing felt less like oversight and more like a mirror, one the system wasn't ready to look into. Senator Riggs leaned forward slowly, as if re-entering the space carefully. "Mr. Musk," she said, quieter this time, "you've described a kind of ethical urgency, a pressure to build before others do, to move fast to avoid being left behind. But what safeguards exist when your vision for the future outpaces the public's ability to consent to it?" Musk nodded. "That's a fair question. But here's the reality. The public isn't blind. They see the future coming. They feel it. And what scares them isn't the speed of innovation, it's the lack of transparency behind it." He gestured lightly with one hand. "I don't hide what I build. I livestream rocket tests. I tweet design schematics. I open source AI models. I say the quiet parts out loud. Not because I enjoy the backlash, but because I believe you can't build trust without exposure." Riggs didn't interrupt. She was listening now, truly. "You want to talk about consent?" Elon continued. "Let's talk about how much of modern technology is already deployed without public understanding, how your phone tracks you, how your data is sold, how AI is already writing court transcripts and reviewing resumes. That's not the future. That's right now. Where was the consent then?" A few heads nodded slowly. Even among those who didn't like him, there was a creeping sense that he wasn't wrong. He wasn't playing to the room. He was speaking to the timeline itself. Senator Jennings interjected carefully, "But isn't it dangerous to expect the public to simply trust technologists, particularly when profit is involved?" "Of course it is," Musk said, "which is why I've been asking for third-party audits of AI safety, why I created OpenAI in the first place, to ensure transparency and development. You think I want all the responsibility? I don't. But when others treat power like a game of secrecy, I'll take the heat for putting it in the open." The gallery had gone stone silent. Even aides weren't typing now. Everyone understood what was happening. Elon wasn't answering questions. He was reframing them. He continued, "If I fail, it's loud. If I succeed, it's loud. And that's intentional. Because if I'm going to lead anything, cars, rockets, satellites, neural links, even ideas, I want to do it where everyone can see me stumble or soar. That's more accountability than most systems can claim." Senator Varnham slammed his folder closed. "So that's it then? We just trust you because you tweet a lot? Because you livestream your rockets?" Musk's eyes flashed, not with anger, but something colder. A kind of cutting precision honed by years of criticism. "No, Senator, you don't have to trust me at all." He leaned in slightly, voice dropping just enough to demand full attention. "But you might want to worry about who you're not watching while you're staring at me." The words detonated quietly, because everyone in the room knew it was true. While politicians obsessed over Elon's tweets, over his missteps and provocations, over his satellites and sarcasm, entire industries were evolving in the dark, private. Data mining, unregulated biotech, black box algorithms controlling more than anyone understood. Musk wasn't the distraction. He was the decoy, the one willing to operate in daylight while others crept deeper into the shadows. And now he had just said it, plainly, with a camera in his face and the world watching. Senator Riggs closed her binder gently. "I don't agree with everything you've said," she murmured, "but I'll say this. You've answered more directly than most who've ever sat in that chair." Musk didn't nod, didn't thank her. He simply sat back, folded his hands, and waited. He didn't come for a fight. He came to be heard, and in a room built to interrogate him, he'd forced everyone else to question themselves. The hearing chamber had shifted into unfamiliar territory. The usual rituals of power, interruptions, sound bites, posturing, had all but vanished. What remained was something more raw. Senators no longer asked questions to trap Elon Musk. They asked because they needed answers. Across the country, millions watched the live stream. Airports, office break rooms, office break. Living rooms where families had only just started paying attention. Twitter, now X, was on fire, trending globally with tags like Musk Unfiltered, Our Senate Shakeup, and He Changed the Room. But in the chamber, none of that mattered. What mattered was the realization, spoken or not, that this hearing wasn't going according to script. Senator Varnham, red-faced and rattled, tried to reclaim the stage with one last offensive. Mr. Musk, let me ask you a final question, since you've made it clear you think you're beyond regulation. I didn't say that, Musk interrupted calmly. I said you're behind it. The senator ignored him. What happens when... You're wrong? What happens when your technology fails? An AI goes rogue, a rocket crashes, a driverless car kills a family? What do we do when you get it wrong? The room stiffened. Everyone was expecting Musk to dodge, reframe, deflect. But he didn't. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low but unwavering. Then I take responsibility, he said. And if I fail catastrophically, I step down. I answer to the people who built the tech with me, and the people affected by it. He paused, then added, But let me ask you something, Senator. When was the last time you stepped down for getting something wrong? For passing legislation that created generational harm? For missing a threat you were elected to see coming? The question didn't need an answer. It was the answer. Varnham stared at him, suddenly speechless. His mouth opened once, then closed. The silence was deafening. Musk wasn't done. You ask what happens when I'm wrong. But I ask, what happens when you do nothing? Because nothing is where the danger thrives. It's where climate change festers, where AI gets built in secret labs, where monopolies form while you hold press conferences. I might fail loud, but you fail quiet. Now even the senators who had kept their distance from the confrontation looked shaken. Senator Riggs tapped her pen, voice soft but clear. So, Mr. Musk, what do you want? Truly, what's your endgame? The room waited. Musk sat back. He didn't rush. Finally, he said, I want a future that doesn't collapse under its own weight. I want humanity to survive long enough to figure out who it can be, not what it settles for. He looked around the room, slow and steady. I want us on Mars, not to escape Earth, but to remind ourselves that we can build again. I want AI that expands our minds instead of replacing them. I want kids to dream about physics the way they dream about fame. And I want systems, governments, institutions, corporations that don't get in the way of the people actually doing the work. Another pause. And if no one else is willing to make that happen, I will. Not because I want to rule it, but because I refuse to let it die waiting for permission. The gallery, once whispering, squirming, skeptical, now sat in reverent stillness. The senators were quiet. Even the aides who had been fact-checking, note-passing, whispering directives through earpieces were just watching now. The chair cleared his throat. Mr. Musk, I think that's all the time we have for today. Musk nodded once. Understood. He stood. No dramatic gestures, no glance back, no press team in tow. Just a man walking, out of a room he had just redefined. As he exited, Senator Riggs leaned slightly toward Varnham. You were trying to make him look small, she said quietly. He made the room look smaller. Varnham didn't respond, because what could he say? Outside, the flashbulbs were waiting, the cameras, the chaos, the headlines. But inside that room, something had cracked, and everyone knew it. Not because Elon Musk made them feel threatened, but because he made them feel obsolete. The cameras erupted the moment Elon Musk stepped through the chamber doors. Flashes lit up like a lightning storm, journalists shouting questions, microphones raised high like weapons in a war of attention. But Elon didn't flinch. He didn't wave, didn't pause. He walked straight through it, calm, unbothered, already somewhere else in his mind. He didn't need to say anything. He had said it. All of it. In a room designed to contain him, he'd redrawn the walls. And now, The story was no longer about a Senate hearing. It was about a man who had made the system feel its own age, its rust, its inertia. Across cable networks, the tone had already shifted. No longer mocking, no longer cynical. Now, anchors spoke with a strange mix of disbelief and gravity. Musk didn't testify. He lectured. He dismantled assumptions without raising his voice. Whatever your politics, you can't ignore what just happened in that room. He made them play defense in their own house. Social media detonated. Viral clips of the most cutting moments spread like wildfire. You're not supposed to trust me. You're supposed to build something better. You fail quiet. I fail loud. You're trying to make me small enough to regulate. I'm making the future big enough that we all survive it. Commentators scrambled to frame it. Was it a masterclass in deflection? A dangerous display of unchecked ego? Or something else? A mirror held up to a government not used to being questioned from below? Inside backrooms of power, the impact was worse than public embarrassment. It was the fear that Musk had just made truth trend. And once it trended, once millions had watched it in real time, the old mechanisms, spin, distraction, delay, felt slow. Emails flew from offices in D.C. to corporate law firms and think tanks. Meetings were called, talking points rewritten. One aide to a top senator whispered to a colleague, "We can't let him set the tone again." But deep down, they all knew the truth. He already had. And yet, Elon wasn't celebrating. He sat in the back of a silent black car, fingers interlocked, staring out the window at a Capitol dome still shimmering in the dusk. Not with awe, with calculation. Because this wasn't victory. It was warning. And he knew it. The real battle wasn't in that room. It was in what came next. In whether governments would evolve or entrench. In whether regulators would collaborate or retaliate. In whether the people who claimed to shape the future would finally listen to those actually building it. That night, he returned to his office, sleek, quiet, humming with screens. Engineers still working, data still streaming, designs still unfurling across whiteboards. While others slept on headlines, he was already deep into code, models, trajectories. One of his engineers looked up. "You saw the coverage?" Musk nodded. "You won." He turned quietly. "It's not about winning," he said. "It's about not losing time." He walked past a screen showing telemetry from the next Starship launch, past a monitor calculating heat thresholds for the Neuralink chip, past another showing training graphs for an experimental AI model. Because while the world argued about who should have the right to speak, Musk was already building the next thing that would make them speak differently. And somewhere, deep in the silence of that office, he muttered two words to no one in particular. Maybe to the senators, maybe to the world. Catch up. Because Elon Musk didn't come to ask for permission. He came to build without it, and the world had just watched in real time what it looks like when power tries to cage a mind that has already escaped gravity.